Hello, everyone, and welcome to that Star Trek podcast, your place for detailed analysis and speculation of all things Trek. My name is Sean Ray, and this is the show that knows that if Quark, Cisco, Morn, and Odo were to get into a Tuvix-style transporter accident, the resulting character would be Quasimodo. Joining me tonight in the historic and beautifully renovated Infinite Potato Studios, we have Scott. How's it going, sir?
I don't know. I didn't think of something beforehand.
And we also have Tom. How you doing, sir?
Once on the path you choose, you cannot turn back.
This is true. All right. So before we get into the Star Trek episode that we're reviewing tonight, I got a little bit of news that came up on my feed, and that is that Nicholas Meyer has pitched a Star Trek movie idea to the powers that be at Paramount. Whether or not anything comes of it, that's anybody's guess. But if anybody's got enough clout in Star Trek to make anything that, fans would like, it would probably be him. Better than Tarantino, anyway. But
for me, he's almost the polar opposite of Tarantino as far as Star Trek goes. If Tarantino made a Star Trek film, then that's probably the one Star Trek property that I would consciously choose not to watch or listen to or have anything to do with. Whereas Nicholas Meyer, if it's Star Trek, whatever he comes up with that he wants to do, I'll watch it.
He had an idea a few years ago he wanted to do a TV series for at the time CBS All Access, or I think it was just it was CBS All Access, and it was going to be about Khan. It was going to be like a SETI Alpha 5 TV series or something like that, and I don't know if it was supposed to be like a prequel to Star Trek 2, or if it was supposed to be like what happened after. Excuse me. Like I said, I don't know if it was supposed to be a prequel or if it was supposed to be something that took place later. The title being SETI Alpha 5, I would kind of lean towards the latter. But I don't know. But he says that this is not that. The idea that he has now is not that. He says he wrote a treatment for a Star Trek feature film. He didn't write a whole script. He wrote a very detailed treatment and a whole pitch document with illustrations and everything. A very comprehensive thing, he says. And he took it to Alex Kurtzman. He took it to J.J. Abrams, and now he's taking it to Emma Watts at Paramount. So whether or not anything comes of it, I don't know. There's also talk of another film that's being pitched. I think eventually there will be another Star Trek film. We've gotten news over the last couple of years of a couple of different things being worked or coming up and being pitched, and then nothing happening from them. But I think eventually one of these things is going to stick. With there being 5 series in production on television, they got to know that they're going to make some money if they put a film out. So.
Oh, yeah. The Nicholas Meyer, that SETI Alpha 5 show you just mentioned. All I'm picturing is either for like the teaser tags, or maybe you get the theme for the show and everything, and right before the last oomph for that opening theme, you've got Khan. This is SETI Alpha 5.
And they would have to play. It would be like distant and echoey that you hear that. And you hear it underneath the title appearing on screen.
I would be fine with CBS, well, now Paramount Plus, with them doing some Star Trek, even if it was on the Paramount Plus network, if it wasn't theatrically released, doing some Star Trek films, maybe creating a series that only comes out in film form every couple of years, release a film. Or something like that. I think that would be a great idea. Kind of like, I know you guys remember Hercules, The Legendary Journeys from back in the 90s, right? Before that was a series, it was a bunch of movies. They released like a bunch of movies. So do something like that. I mean, not like that. That's terrible. but do something, release a film about a certain set of characters, and then you don't have to have an entire series worked up. You just have a film, and then you've got a couple of years to come up with a really good story for that set of characters again. And that way your characters, your stories don't dry up. You only release it when you've got something good.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
And they could take a page from Disney and the MCU if they make movies, and drop in a character or two that we're familiar with from whatever series or time frame that they're playing around in.
Yeah,
and then
I would love to see. Go ahead.
I was going to say have a phase ending movie where they have the whole cast from all the various series in there. Maybe it'd have to be some kind of temporal anomaly that brings them all together. So,
well, you have
Infinity War. So.
Right, you would have to have some type of temporal portal that would allow Discovery to temporarily come back to their century and hang out with Pike on his Enterprise, and then through a fluke of subspace, they have to get on a call with the crew of the Cerritos to discuss the problem. So it's Discovery and the Enterprise FaceTiming with the Lower Decks crew to solve this problem that's happening in Free Cloud. There we go.
That is the one series that I don't see any way that they can ever cross over. I mean, it's just
what, Lower Decks?
Yeah.
Lower Decks has found a way to cross itself over with every other series because of their jokes and their references.
Yeah, but you can't. There's no way to have Lower Decks characters show up on Discovery or something like that because it would just be too ridiculous.
There's a comic, or maybe it was. I've got the trade paperback, the Q Conflict, and if I'm thinking the right one, where you've got Q and Trelane and I think Organians, Metrons. There's a couple of those, super all-powerful species, and they have teams made up of all the various Star Trek properties. So you had Voyager, DS9, Next Gen, original series, and their crews are all mixed. That's how that comic played out. So,
is that the one where Q goes over to the Kelvin timeline? There's a comic that came out several years ago that I can't remember the name of the story, but Q goes into the Kelvin timeline and then goes into the future. So we see the Deep Space Nine and Next Generation era of the Kelvin timeline. And it's a pretty cool story because none of the characters are doing what they were doing originally. A lot of them have completely different personalities. It's almost a mirror universe story, but not quite. But
it's
okay.
Intriguing, but at the same time,
All right. So tonight we're going to be reviewing the second episode of season 1 of Star Trek: The Animated Series, which was titled Yesteryear. Written by D.C. Fontana, directed by Hal Sutherland. The original air date was September 15th, 1973. The IMDb description says, after finding himself erased from recent history, Spock must travel back in time to save himself as a youth. So, before we talk about the episode itself, I thought it would be good to take a few minutes and talk about the animated series because we've never covered an animated series episode before.
Mm-hmm.
So, we all know that in the 70s, any TV show that was even a little bit popular got a Saturday morning cartoon. So we've all heard of Gilligan's Planet, Laverne and Shirley in the Army, even the Brady Bunch.
I have Gilligan's Planet.
Oh yeah. Well, they did Gilligan's Island, and then it got canceled, and they came back and did Gilligan's Planet, which was the same story. They just replaced all the headhunters with aliens, and that was about it. They even there was a Brady Bunch cartoon, there was a Partridge Family cartoon, Happy Days, Mork and Mindy, all that stuff. But
MC Hammer had a cartoon. Okay,
yeah, that was a 90. We're gonna do an episode of Cosmic Potato one day where we talk about. I can't believe they made a cartoon of that.
RoboCop,
Filmation,
Rambo.
I have the RoboCop cartoon.
Yeah.
So Filmation actually came to Roddenberry while Star Trek was still on the air during the 3rd season. And they said, we want to make a cartoon. And Roddenberry was all for it. But they wanted to make a cartoon that was about like kids on a different starship. And the crew of the Enterprise trained them and something like that. It was not going to be good. But Star Trek ended up getting canceled, so the idea kind of got dropped. But this actually happened 4 years later. Because Star Trek became so popular in syndication that they decided to go ahead and do a series that was practically a 4th and 5th season, because they got 2 seasons out of this cartoon, 22 episodes in all. And so that's how we got Star Trek, the cartoon. And if you watch it, it's Filmation. So if you've seen like Super Friends and stuff it's that kind of animation. It's it's a lot of still pictures with just only the mouth moving or an eyebrow moving every now and then, and things like that. But a
lot of
yeah, exactly. Walter Koenig was not in the series. They replaced him with Lieutenant Arx, who was an Edosian, and he wasn't in the episode that we're talking about tonight. He had 3 arms and 3 legs. Lieutenant Mress, something like that. It's M''RESS. She is a female Cation.
Yep.
She sometimes kind of shared duties with Uhura. So sometimes it would be her, sometimes it would be Uhura as the communications officer. James Doohan and Majel Barrett, also performed the voices of all kinds of different characters on the show. Mm-hmm. Anytime that there would be a guest, almost anytime that there would be a guest, it would either be James Doohan or Majel Barrett would be doing their voice, depending on if it was a man or a woman. But they only wanted to get William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan, and Majel Barrett. And Leonard Nimoy said that he wouldn't do it if they didn't bring in George Takei and Nichelle Nichols, mainly because they were the 2 characters that showed the ethnic diversity in the 23rd century, and you can't have those characters on there and have white people doing their voices.
Right.
And they're like, "Oh, I didn't think about that."
Surprised
so they did
not thinking about that in the 70s. You don't say.
Yeah, they barely think about it now. They brought in George Takei. They brought in Uhura. They didn't bring in Walter Koenig, but he did write an episode. He wrote the screenplay for an episode called The Infinite Vulcan.
I would expect him to have been a lot saltier about that whole thing. They bring everyone else back, and Nimoy fights for the other 2, but not for him.
Yeah, and I don't know why not him. I think he let it drop just because they did bring him back for the films. So, I mean, like, at least he got to do that. But
right.
Yeah, I would like to hear that story. I would like to hear. I mean, I'm sure it was a budget thing. Like, we can afford these other 2, but we can't bring on anybody else, so somebody's got to go. And since Walter Koenig was not in the original crew, because he wasn't in the 1st season,
right?
I guess he was the one to go.
It wouldn't surprise me if it was a combination of Walter was not in the 1st season. He was not part of their original crew, and he's another white guy. And it sounded like Nimoy was really pushing for, if we at least need to bring in George and Nichelle, because that's going to represent a more diverse cast. Whereas Walter, I mean, great. It would be great for him and his character to be in the show, but doesn't necessarily add that diversity. And that sounds like what Nimoy was really pushing for.
Right. So Yesteryear is the second episode of the series. And to tell you the truth, when I saw this a few years ago, I wasn't expecting very much. I remember watching this show when I was a kid because it came on Nickelodeon, like on a Saturday afternoon or something like that. But I didn't remember any of the stories. But I went back and watched the entire series when it first came to Netflix several years ago. And I wasn't expecting much. I was expecting it's the same company that did Super Friends, so the plots are not really a whole lot better than the animation usually. But this episode is a pretty solid sci-fi story. DC Fontana did what she could to bring the soul of Star Trek to her script and give us a roughly 24-minute story, and it wasn't bad. What'd you guys think about it, Scott? What'd you think of this episode?
I definitely think that whoever cooked up the idea of the, I believe it was 7th season episode of TNG, Firstborn, where James Sloyan plays an adult Alexander Rashenko who has traveled back in time to help Worf teach young Alexander to be a warrior. Makes me think that whoever came up with that idea saw this episode.
Yeah.
To have an older version of someone come back in time as a family friend or whatever, to try to affect some change. There were definitely some parallels in that. But overall, yes, a good episode. You can easily imagine this story being fleshed out, expanded, decompressed, and made into an hour-long episode.
Yeah.
It's easy to see that happen, and I almost wish that they had, because in true animated series fashion, especially an animated series from the 70s, they do not take their time with this. It moves very, very quickly. Just the near casualness with which, and this might be history playing its role in my perception of it, but to have an animated series episode where at the beginning and at the end, it's the Guardian of Forever, okay,
yeah,
like it wasn't one of the biggest aspects of one of the more popular episodes of Star Trek in history. Is that it's the Guardian of Forever, no biggie.
Yeah.
And they all come back from their mission, and no one recognizes Spock. And then there's this Andorian who we see for a minute, and then he's never mentioned again. But he seems very important for that minute and a half that he's on screen. Then he has a strangely heartfelt and poignant goodbye, and then he's done. He's literally erased, and we never hear from him again.
Yeah, and he just turns into a joke at the end of the episode.
Unless you get this book, where one of the stories, this is, imagine if the TNG episode Parallels decided to become a book series. This, and I have, I think, 2 other collections behind me. These are short stories and novellas that take place in alternate universes where something is different. It's like Star Trek What If.
Yeah.
And one of the stories, I honestly can't remember exactly. Okay, yeah, there's it's an alternate take on the Genesis project and what happens with it and its creation, but it is set in the timeline that is created by Spock dying as a child, the timeline that is referenced in this episode of the animated series, which is why you see on the cover there's this Andorian on the front. That is that's Felon, the first officer that was Spock's replacement in the new timeline. He gets to be an actual character in this thing. And the first time I read the story, I had not seen the episode, so I was really confused. But it still ended up being a really good story. I like this concept.
Tom, what about you? What'd you think of this?
I think it's telling that this particular episode of the animated series is the only one that was considered to be canon after the series. Roddenberry, a lot of the powers that be were saying that I'll just ignore the animated series. Yeah, we had fun doing it, but it's not part of the universe. It's not canon, except for Yesteryear, the one episode. Now, other aspects of it have come in, but so I liked it. I think they had a good story there. The Guardian being like this afterthought before and after was actually just so that they could spend as little time as possible on explaining time travel and how they were going to do it. They just, we have this method of time travel, so we're going to use that. So I think it was a really good way of expanding and making use of that animated series. What I have to keep reminding myself is that it really is a standout for the animated series, and that, like, I was watching it today and going, wow, animated series isn't that bad. It's much better than I remember. And then I thought about some of the other shows in the animated series, and it's like, okay, that's not one that I'm going to shuffle play and go through the whole, or just watch through the whole series, because some of those, like the Infinite Vulcan, if I remember, was really bad. They had some good concepts and a lot of stuff. I was going to say a lot of stuff from this episode. There are aspects of the animated series that got picked up in other forms. Eric's and Maress, those two added characters you mentioned. Peter David used them in the Excalibur series with Mackenzie Calhoun.
Right. In New Frontier.
New Voyages.
Yeah,
New Frontier, yeah.
Yeah. He's got those two characters in there, and typical Peter David humor about them, so the animated series, I think, does get dumped on a little bit. This is a stand-up and standout episode for it.
Yeah. Captain Kirk and Spock return from a time traveling research project. So evidently this is more proof that in the original series they used time travel as an exploratory tool, and just did it all the time. We're going to go back in time and check this out. We're going to go watch this thing. James Doohan did the voice of the Guardian, and it's like nobody went back and watched the original episode City on the Edge of Forever before they made this, because he sounded like he was trying to be like an old man. The travelers are coming back, But
they changed the Guardian completely. I mean, his whole function and like how he operated. I want to go to to Saturday, March 13th, 2021. Boom, there it is. No, record it, time it, do your slow motion jump into it.
Yeah. Yeah, originally you had to watch all of history play out, and really, really quickly, and time it just right to jump through. And now you can just ask
watching your tricorder the whole time until you decide to just, what? The last 5 seconds of this countdown, I'm just going to wing it. Now.
Let's just go for it. And also, apparently just watching through the Guardian, just watching the past play out can change it, because that's what happens in this episode. There's a little bit of a mind freak here, because something about this plot just doesn't make sense to me. So we'll talk about it. They emerge from the portal. No one on board the Federation Starship Enterprise recognizes Spock. And even Captain Kirk even says, "I'm the only one that recognizes you." And I'm like, well, what about the other guy that came through with you? Why doesn't he recognize? Because nothing would be changed for him. Also, in the original episode, everybody that was on the planet nothing changed for them. So, like Uhura and Scotty and all of them, when they were on the planet and city on the edge of forever, when the Enterprise disappeared, they didn't disappear. So, when they come through in this episode and Bones is like, hey, who's that? He should remember him because he's in the vicinity of the Guardian.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
In my opinion, but you know, it's a cartoon. I know I can hear Rick now saying it's a cartoon.
The Guardian upgraded. He had updates.
So what happens is that Spock and Kirk and this red shirt had gone back into the past, and they were observing, like, I forgot what they said. The Orion, the civilization's beginning or something like that. And while they're there, this team that was on the planet was using the Guardian to observe some other times. And one of the times that they observed was like 30 years in Vulcan's past, around the time that Spock would have been a child. And evidently there was an incident when Spock was a child where he got killed. And Spock says in the original timeline, a cousin of his had saved him. And Kirk is like, well, did that cousin look just like you do now? He says, yes, as a matter of fact, he did. So they determined that Spock was supposed to be in the past saving himself, but because he was elsewhere in time and he wasn't there when they played it through, then he wasn't there originally. But the whole mind freak is that the only reason that he went back is because this happened. You see what I'm saying? The whole time he had been there to save himself, but the only reason he went back was because this happened, and now this hasn't happened, so he's dead. And it's just, the whole thing just kind of screws with my head.
There's a bit of a chicken and the egg paradox, as well as some decent forethought on the part of the writers for using Bill and Ted style flow of time, where 30 years ago, the history of Vulcan, and present day where Spock was supposed to go back in time and save himself, but because he was busy in Orion's past, he couldn't do it. Those timelines are moving along at the same pace.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently. So, or it could just be the fact that it's the 70s and they didn't really give a damn when it came to writing time travel stories that made sense. We don't have time for making sense. We only got 23 minutes, well, it's the 70s, so probably 25 minutes to tell the story.
It could also be that they only gave DC Fontana like a day and a half to write the script, and and she just did the best that she could.
Mm-hmm.
So Kirk hypothesizes that Salik, the cousin that saved Spock, was Spock. So Spock goes through the Guardian and goes back in time to Vulcan's past, to when he was a kid, and he assumes that identity of Selig, a distant cousin of Sarek, and he's welcomed into the home of Sarek and Amanda Grayson. Mark Leonard returned as Sarek, and they only animated his eyebrow. They just kept showing this close up, and I mean, he's talking, his mouth is moving, but just every once in a while his eyebrow goes up and comes back down, and that's the only animation that he did. Also, we see Child Spock being bullied by other Vulcans, which is an idea that got played with in the 2009 reboot of Star Trek. I think there's a couple of novels that dealt with this, where Spock is being bullied by. I know they kind of dealt with it a little bit in Discovery too. So it's interesting to see it go back this far, because we never saw anything like that in the original series. But this is so close to that it's interesting to see that those ideas came from something that far back.
Mm-hmm. Vulcans are dicks.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. They talk about how advanced they are, but I mean, when have you ever seen a Vulcan child that's not an a-hole?
And why do they make their kids dress like that? Like every kid was wearing bikini briefs and a sash. and that's it.
Well, didn't Filmation do the He-Man cartoon also?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
They're just using the same wardrobe.
And they probably used some of the same animation cells and just drew over them.
I want to interrupt.
So,
This is get it centered there.
yeah.
The novelizations of the animated series, and the cover for this first one was from that episode. Ironically, not ironically, just funny, I found a misprint in this book that, I mean, this was our dad's. Scott, my dad, had these, and I stole them. The misprint in the table of contents, it lists Yesteryear starting on 71 and another episode on another page, and they're totally flipped around. And yeah, it even, I mean, it's labeled as that, but yeah, it's definitely not the story. For the first page talks about a log entry, and he's burping or something. So like Kirk burps in the middle of his log entry.
Oh, Alan Dean Foster.
Speaking of whom, I started reading his novelization of The Last Starfighter this afternoon.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that would be cool.
Okay, so
I can't remember. Tom, are you on that episode when we talked to him?
Okay. No, it was just me and you and Rick.
All right. Because did you listen to the episode afterward?
I did.
Okay, so you heard me mention how I bought that book while we were recording the show?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, Sean, we've diverted.
No, you're fine. Selleck journeys to the desert, finds his younger self, and saves him. He was trying to prove. Well, he was supposed to go through a test, which I didn't write down what the name of the test was that he was supposed to be doing, but he was supposed to do a test. Okay, yeah. The next day, and Sarek basically told him, "You better pass, because if you don't pass, I'm going to be very disappointed in you." And actually, he told him, "I don't expect you to fail. Like, yeah, I mean, you're going to pass, right?"
Because if you do fail, then I'm kicking you out of the house, and your sister gets your room.
Yeah. So Spock goes out into the desert at night to kind of practice, and older Spock, Selleck, follows him because he remembers, oh, it wasn't during the test that I got into this trouble. It was the night before, and he follows him. And then he gets attacked by this monster. What was the name of the monster? I didn't write it down. Anyway, it had Godzilla's voice, because when it made a roar, it was. I mean, seriously, it was straight up. They took Godzilla and like put it here, and put the sound there. And then he gets into a fight with Spock's pet, which is a
Sailot.
Yeah, it was a Sailot, which we've heard Spock mention that before in the original series. He mentioned that it was this huge beast that had giant fangs and stuff like that. And it was, but it was a sweet beast, you know.
Well, that one was. We did actually see a proper Sailot in Enterprise season 4.
Yeah, that's right. That's
and
right.
Lamata, the green one, the Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets into a fight. They get into a fight, and then Spock jumps down and jumps on the back of the beast, and there's a Vulcan neck pinch on it, and it passes out. But his pet Ichaya was injured. One of the poison claws punctured it, and it was dying. So little Spock decides he's going to go back to the village and get a healer to come back and help. And Southern phrase, bless his heart. This little kid that did Spock's voice, he did a lot of voices back then, because I've heard this kid's voice before. He used to do, I think it was Christopher Robin's voice in some of the Winnie the Pooh cartoons and stuff. But his line delivery, he's obviously reading from a page. He's like,
Oh.
no, I have to do this. No one can do it for me.
Oh, so you didn't read why his delivery's like that?
No,
So on Memory Alpha, they have a description about it. He went in, like, got the call from his agent that he had an audition for this, and when he goes in, they give him this huge stack of pages or sides, and normally with an audition, you're just doing a couple, like maybe a small scene of a few lines.
Yeah.
He had pretty much the entire script there. He recorded all the lines there, just cold read on all of it. The director's giving him just a little bit of direction for his audition. And a couple weeks later, his agent says, hey, you got the part. And the guy, I think it's Billy, says, all right, when do I go to record? Oh, you already did.
They're just going to use that recording.
They were using his cold reads. And he comments on one line in particular, because he didn't always get all of his cue lines. He may have got just a couple words to cue him in to say his. And when he had to go back to get the healer, he's like, I will go and bring the healer here. And he keeps arguing that he wanted to say, I will bring the healer here. But
yeah, there's something about that time, production values, especially for Saturday morning cartoons. Nobody really cared because it was going to be a bunch of little kids watching it. And even with some of the adults in this, not just this episode, but this entire series, they're reading their lines, and the inflection of the way that they say their lines does not match what that character is doing at the time. That character can be running and he'll be talking just like I am right now. Like when Spock can go ahead.
Some of those scenes definitely had the sound of a Saturday morning that's starting way too soon.
Yeah.
Most of Shatner's lines through the whole animated series just sounded really quiet and soft, and he's probably on some kind of herbal refreshment.
Daddy's back medicine.
a lot of especially William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, they were doing like conventions, and they were doing a lot of traveling, and they would record their lines on the road. They would just go to a recording studio in whatever city they were in, record their lines, and they would get shipped back to LA to get put into the episode. But when Kirk and Spock come back through the Guardian at the beginning, and McCoy says, "Who's that, Jim?" "I don't know him." It doesn't even sound like the McCoy I know would have said that completely. "Who is that, Jim?" Something, Anyway, so the kid goes back and gets the healer, voiced by James Doohan, and they come back, and he tries to heal Achaya, but it's too late. The poison's gotten too far into his system. In the meantime, older Spock is telling younger Spock, if your pet dies, you got to handle that without crying, because you're a Vulcan. That's what Vulcans do. And it's okay to grieve for someone that dies, but only if their life was wasted. And Achaya's life was not wasted because he saved Spock's life. And Spock also feels bad because Achaya did not die in the original timeline, but he doesn't really have time to go back and do it all over again to save him again. So little Spock lets the healer euthanize his pet, and Spock says goodbye to everybody. Says goodbye to Sarek and asks Sarek to take his time and get to know his son and all of that. Which,
so
whether he did or not, I don't know.
Reading between the lines, Spock is saying, "Hey, Dad, don't be a dick."
Yeah. Yeah. Stop treating Spock so bad.
It was literally the exact phrasing I was going to use.
I did like the line when Sarek said, "My home is your home if you're ever this way again. If you ever come this way again," and Spock says, "I think I shall not."
I
so
am
he,
piecing out of here as soon as possible.
so he
I
goes
will
back
go
to the
the other way
future.
around the planet.
Right.
Home.
He goes back to the future, and Kirk is the only one there, and so we really don't know at that point if he fixed anything, because Kirk sent everybody else up. Everybody that didn't remember him, they're gone back up to the ship. You have to wait until you get back up there to find out if you even fixed anything. And then they get up there and they make a joke about the Andorian being gone, and that's the end of the episode.
Now, by the logic established at the beginning of the episode, Spock should have come out of the Guardian, and Kirk would have been like, "Dude, where were you? What did you go do?"
Yeah, what'd you do? Exactly. They weren't even consistent in this episode, much less consistent with the first story. I tried to find any information about whether or not Harlan Ellison had a problem with this episode being made, or I couldn't find anything about Harlan Ellison, because this was his original concept. But I guess as soon as they made the episode, it all belongs to them. They can do whatever they want. But the fact that he is the one that made up the Guardian, and then they used the Guardian in this episode, I was expecting to find something where he at least like made a cursing rant about them using this or something like that. But I couldn't find anything. So,
one of these days, I want to see this episode inspire a. It would be so easy to just drop a simple joke into an episode of Lower Decks in season 2. That fella on the Cerritos who believes that Wolf 359 was an inside job, and and the Dominion War was a hoax. Season 2, we'll see him walking around the lower decks of the Cerritos, holding a sign that says his name was Thelen Tavares.
or he'll have some conspiracy theory that Spock actually died when he was 7, and the one that we knew was an imposter. So the Sea-Lot, which is the saber-toothed bear-like creature that is Spock's pet, was first mentioned in the original series episode Journey to Babel. In that episode, McCoy asks Spock's mother, Amanda, what Spock was like as a child, and she mentioned that pet. When this series premiered, George Takei was running for Los Angeles City Council at the time. His opponents protested. This is ridiculous. His opponents protested that any episode that he was in would violate the equal time law, which states that political opponents must have equal time on television. So, although it is the second episode in Los Angeles, this episode was aired first instead of the first episode, Beyond the Farthest Star, because Takei does not appear in that episode. Yeah, that was ridiculous. So I can't do a voice on the cartoon, because then that means that you have to let my opponent have some equal time to talk about issues.
See, and it's ridiculous, but at the same time, I can easily imagine Tucker Carlson coming up with some kind of
it would be done now.
Equal nonsense to that.
James Doohan actually recorded the lines for Sarek, but they weren't used because they found out Mark Leonard was available. So he was going to be the voice of Sarek as well, and then Mark Leonard said, "No, I'll do it." And as I said before, the title character's roar from Godzilla was used for the Lamatia. The cartoon view of Spock's hometown of Shikar has been added to the background in the remastered version of Amok Time. So back in 2006, when they released that Blu-ray, they didn't take the cartoon and put it in the background. They like remade it and put that town in the background of the of that episode. So, and DC Fontana included the death of Spock's pet as a way of helping children deal with the death of their pets. NBC wanted the pet's death removed from the script, but Fontana refused, and Gene Roddenberry supported her. So this was supposed to be... Go ahead.
I was surprised that they killed the dog.
Yeah. It was a very special episode.
In the 70s, they killed the dog. I was really, really surprised when they did that.
On a very special episode of Star Trek. Okay. You guys have anything you want to add? This is a little bit of a shorter episode of the podcast, but it's because we're talking about a 25-minute episode of a cartoon instead of something else.
Yes, it's Filmation. Yes, it's 70s cartoons from a Saturday morning. Yes, it's 50% James Doohan, but it's not bad. Yeah. There's plenty of stuff we can make fun of because it's a 70s cartoon, but at the same time, it's a surprisingly solid episode of Star Trek if you forgive it the woven in problems that it has because of its time frame and target audience. But if you set that aside, it's decent Star Trek if you look at it the right way.
I would argue that this episode is... There are some episodes of the actual original series that are worse than this episode of the animated series.
Spock's brain.
I kind of like... There's aspects of Spock's brain that I actually like. So. All right, that's going to pretty much do it for us. Tom, thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, sir.
And Scott, thank you as well.
Who's that, Tom? I don't know him.
I don't know that guy. Who's that? All right. I want to remind you that we've got a lot of good stuff happening on the website. There are 13 podcasts available on the network right now. There may be more coming soon. There are new episodes coming out all the time. So follow us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter to keep up. We're going to be back next week to complete our journey with the original series crew in their last time travel story, which was Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. So come and join us. And until then, remember, loss of life is to be mourned, but only if the life was wasted.